In a few minutes, folks, we're going to have Stephen Mehler from Boulder talk to us about his in-depth work in Egyptology. Right now, though, we have a real bright fellow, Dwayne Briggs. He's performed for the best, and I'd like you to give him a nice welcome and your attention for about 3.5 minutes. Unfortunately, I think you're going to want more. Dwayne?
Thank you, Ron. Well, it's great to be back this morning, or this morning to me. I got it right. I'm going to do a song. This is one that I wrote in 1991. This has to do with a loosely metaphysically based interpretation of the parable of the prodigal son. It's about going back home, going back to source. This is called Shelter of Your Love. Too many years I've been waiting seas. Too many empty words and pockets full of broken trees. On the long road home, I found you here, waiting me, and reflected in your eyes so clearly now I can see that here I am in the shelter of your love. Here I am in the shelter of your love. After the saints have all gone marching in, and we can see beyond the veil again, I will arise and unlock the prison of my soul, and live again in this dream that's ages old. That here I am in the shelter of your love. Here I am in the shelter of your love. Lord, I will arise and unlock the prison of my soul, and live again in this dream that's ages old, this dream that's ages old, that here I am in the shelter of your love. Here I am in the shelter of your love.
That was a nice interlude. Now back to the intellectual mind. I'm happy to introduce an old friend, Stephen Mehler. Come on up, Stephen. You tell him your credentials.
Okay, we should be on. Everybody hear me okay? Great. Well, this is going to be a little change in pace, although not really. People have always asked me, why do I come to conferences like this, International UFO Congress, or this, to speak, when mainly people are talking about government conspiracies, health conspiracies, and things like that. Well, I'll make a bold statement for you right to begin with, to say that all the things that have been discussed here these past 3 days, the obfuscation of truth by governments, by health professionals, by educators, really had its beginning 5,000 years ago in dynastic Egypt. And that will really be the subject of my second book. But we're going to talk somewhat about that, and if someone brings a question to that at the end, we can address that. But it also has to deal with the fact that we have been not told the truth about things that are happening today, and we've been not told the truth about how the things were, how it's come to be. And it is my distinct opinion that we cannot know who we are today and where we're going unless we know where we have come from. And for me, the path led to the civilization known as ancient Egypt. Now, it is said that, in truth, I've been studying this subject for almost 35 years. But in truth, it began when I was about 8 years old. And to my mother's blessed memory, she always kept around our house the two great pictorial magazines of the day, and this is the early 50s, Life magazine and National Geographic. And I clearly remember around the age of 8, thumbing through an edition of National Geographic magazine and stopping dead on a picture of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx at Giza. Now, at that age, I could not consciously know or articulate what was happening, but the Sphinx made a very deep unconscious connection with me. And that's something that has guided me my whole life. Now, it's not true to say that at that moment I decided, well, I was going to become an Egyptologist or an archaeologist, no. But it did put me on the path to learn, to want to learn answers for myself and not accept what institutions were telling me. I now know consciously that the Sphinx and I have a very deep connection. And it never is a failure to me that every time I go to Egypt, that the first thing I do is go to pay homage to the Sphinx. Because she, and she is the operative word, which we will return to, she is the Alpha and Omega. And I'll explain that to you in detail before we're done. So but it really started in a formal sense around 1968. Now, this is a time constraint for me, because usually when I do a presentation like this, it's 2 to 3 hours with a lot of slides and give ample time for questions. So I'm going to necessarily have to condense the early part of this talk to get to what is really the substance, and that'll be the visual, the slides I'm going to show you. Because with the possible exception of maybe 2 to 3 people in this room, the majority of you, even of those that have been to Egypt, will not have seen what I'm going to show you. And those 2 to 3 people know who they are. Things that even the Egyptologists have not seen. And that's because of the uniqueness of what I've been given to do here. But I forgot to bring this up. My whole journey, my whole story is documented in my book, Land of Osiris, which tells exactly why we came to this point and how, after 35 years, I don't come to these conclusions lightly. Of course, it went through the whole personal journey. It really starts about 1968 formally, when I picked up a book called Moses and Monotheism. Moses and Monotheism was a book that was published based on 3 essays that Sigmund Freud had written and was published posthumously after his death in 1939. That book began the serious journey for me that this was going to be my life's work. And the real detail of that will be in the second book that I'm writing, which will give a different history of Judaism than has ever been written before. In fact, the words Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew have never been properly defined. In this current book, The Land of Osiris, you'll get a definition of the word Hebrew, which will start the journey for the second book. But we're going to deal with it in a way that has never been addressed before. But that book set me on the path. And along the way, reading through all the academic Egyptology, it became clear to me that what was coming out of academic Egyptology was way incomplete, that it was not giving an accurate picture of what that civilization was really all about, and in particular from the messages I was getting from the Sphinx. So quickly I went through academic Egyptology, then delved into the metaphysical tradition. I had the good fortune to serve as a staff research scientist for the Rosicrucian Order Amark in San Jose, California for a couple of years. And in that context, I delved very deeply into the Rosicrucian, Masonic, theosophical traditions about ancient Egypt, all which state that all their teachings came from ancient Egypt. But what really set me on the path and why we're here today was a book that I discovered in the early 1990s, a book called Ancient Egypt, The Sirius Connection, written by a wonderful lady named Murray Hope, who's a Wiccan priestess and Egyptologist. And in that book, Ms. Hope stated that there was still a tradition that existed in Egypt today, a living tradition that kept the old ways, that existed before there was Islam, before there was Coptic Christianity. And that was a key to me, and there was a couple of other series of events which I document, which confirmed to me that this tradition still existed. So I knew that this is where I had to go, where the answers I had to seek. And through the grace of God, and every time I've gone to Egypt, it's always been arranged for me to be there. And I'm going again next January, and we'll talk about that at the end. So we'll be able to show you, if you want to come, the things that I'm going to show you today in person, so you can experience them for yourselves. And that's the only way you'll ever own it and know it. In 1992, it'll be 10 years this fall, I got to go to Egypt. And the first day in Egypt, I met the man who has become my teacher. He was a tour guide for the group I was involved with then. His name is Abdel Hakim Awayan. Everybody that's been to Egypt, particularly many people know him as Hakim. He's a well-known tour guide for over 50 years, but it's only in the mid-90s that he has revealed himself as an indigenous wisdom keeper. So what we're going to present to you today is a total different understanding than you've ever heard on the Discovery Channel, Learning Channel, or PBS. And the two names I'll bring out, those names have been dropped about people who obfuscate the truth. And I'll mention the names of Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, and we'll return to those names later. Because these people, two individuals, are mainly responsible for controlling the information about what ancient Egypt was all about. So this began a series of tutelage with this gentleman that has resulted in the teachings I'm going to bring to you today. And in a nutshell, what the indigenous wisdom keepers of Egypt are saying is that there was a civilization in North Africa over 10,000 years ago that was very highly advanced. And these are the people who built the pyramids and carved the Sphinx. And then the first question is always asked, well, who built the pyramids? Was it aliens or Atlanteans? No, we say, according to the indigenous tradition, it was indigenous African people. However, in my book, there are two chapters, one about Atlantis and one about the extraterrestrial question. So these questions have to be addressed. But we state categorically, according to the tradition that I've brought forward, that it was indigenous human beings on this planet, very highly advanced. And the key to the teachings that we're bringing forward is that we were them, they were us. Just like at the International UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada, I've gotten up on stage and said, there are no extraterrestrials. We are them. I believe we're star-seeded people, as Zachariah Sitchin has stated, and we can go into detail about that because I will discuss that in the slides, because it is a tradition of the indigenous tradition of Egypt, like Native American traditions throughout the Americas and the Maya, that we originally came from the stars, that we did not totally evolve on this planet. But my teacher made it very clear to me that it was indigenous African people who created this civilization. In fact, instead of the word Atlantis, and I know Frank Joseph will be talking about Atlantis after I'm done, we use the term global maritime culture. In that I'm saying to you that prior to 10,000 years ago, there were advanced cultures all around this planet, and they were all in contact. That's not to say there was not an island continent in the Atlantic, because many people have personal memories of this, and they get disturbed if you discuss something maybe against one's own personal truths. I'm not saying that there was not an island continent in the Atlantic that may have sunk, but it was not the only advanced civilization on the planet. And my teacher will not hear of a story of Atlantis unless the ancient civilization of Northern Africa is included. So what I'm going to present to you is a complete paradigm shift. We don't even discuss the term Egyptology. We have created a whole new discipline. And that has to deal with certain things. This is the teaching part now, and you can take your notes if you want. There's no test afterward. But we have to lay down certain groundworks before we can go further. Lay down certain shifts in paradigm so you understand that what we're talking about is almost a complete 180-degree shift to what is taught in academic Egyptology. And we start with the name itself. Now, next year I hope to have a PowerPoint presentation because everybody seems to be going that way, and we'll be able to get these things up on the screen. But I'm going to have to maybe deal with some crude drawings I've made in the past. And I'll say it first and then show it to you if you want to write it down. The word Egypt. Egypt. Egypt is the name of the country in northeastern Africa today. And let's get that clear, because many people think of Egypt as a civilization of the Middle East. It is not. Egypt is in northeastern Africa, and it is an African country. And the tradition that my teacher, Hakim, brings forward is a traditionally African tradition of oral tradition, of people who are oral wisdom keepers. Long before the written records, this is the way history was kept. And certain tribes had the responsibility to not only memorize the history of their tribe, but of all tribes. So what Hakim tells us is this ancient civilization was 42 tribes, and 42 is a number, people who like to get into numerology and number mysticism, that appears throughout Egyptian symbology all the time, 42. Originally, Osiris was broken into 42 parts, not 14, as Plutarch told us, because each tribe had a part. And when the tribes come together, that's when the consciousness is full again, and we'll explain that. So 42 indigenous tribes who were all races of people. Now let's get that clear, because we have many different people who've come up with theories that the original Egyptians were red-haired, copper-skinned, white people. Just like a lot of the traditions which Hakim is vehemently against of Atlantis being a group of enlightened white people who left a doomed Atlantic continent and went to Africa to teach ignorant people of color how to build in stone and create a civilization. When I first discussed Atlantis with him, he wouldn't hear this discussion because he believed it was racist, utterly racist. And he's a profound Afrocentrist, as I am, which means we believe all civilization, all humanity, all of us, Mother Africa is our place. Africa is the mother of all of us. All you have to do is take a map of the world, lay it out in flat projection, cut out all the continents, and you all know this, and you put it together. Obviously, there was one landmass at one time. Some of the scientists call it Pangaea, Pangea. But in geology, they say that it separated hundreds of millions of years ago. Well, it may not have been that long ago. And when you put all the continents together, Africa is in the center. It's where it all started and then radiated out. So we are profound Afrocentrists. But there's a lot of other theories about that we don't ascribe to. But we believe that it all began there. And so the tradition that we're bringing forward is the word Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word. It's based on a Greek word, Egyptos. It is the name of the country in North Africa today, but it was not the name of the ancient civilization. Egypt, Egyptos, is a Greek contraction, Hegepetos. It's based on the ancient term, Het-ka-pata. And if you need to see it, Het means place. Ka is an interesting word. Many people write about Egypt, they lecture about Egypt. Everybody has their own definition about what the Ka was. Well, again, I go with my indigenous teacher's definition. The Ka was the physical projection of the soul, not the body, which they put a T ending, hat or kat, but it was what maybe some of us refer to as the astral body. It is that which contains the personality, attaches itself to the body. This is why you see in ancient Egyptian tombs that they always have an offering for the Ka. They put out food, they put out water, as if the Ka actually has corporal form. It doesn't, but it's attached to the body. They believe the Ka always remains in the tomb. So therefore, Het-ka-pata, the place of the Ka of Ptah. Now who Ptah was, we're going to return to, because we're going to get back to this little extraterrestrial point. But Ptah is considered to be one of the so-called creator gods by the Egyptologists. So basically what it's saying by Het-ka-pata is the place where the physical projection of Ptah manifested, or the place where Ptah manifested. That was only one area. That was what the Greeks called Memphis. The ancient term was Menefer, which meant the generation of harmony. It was only one area. It became the so-called capital of dynastic Egypt. It wasn't the civilization. The civilization was Kemet, or it's written KMT. because in the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, vowels were sacred, just as it is in Hebrew. And they were not written, they were implied. So it's usually written KMT. You see many different spellings. We adopt the spelling KHEMIT. That's just for ours. We use it as Chemet, Kemet. It meant the black land. It meant the land that was deposited by the Nile River, the alluvial soil, which allowed the civilization to flourish, agriculture. So the people were Cometian, their language was Cometian, and the land was Kemet. That's first. So we say, clearly, what we are discussing for you today is Kemetology, not Egyptology. The truth of the ancient civilization. And that's all depicted here if you need to see it in written form. And we have to do several of the quick definitions so we can get into the material of the slides. There are several terms that have the term per. Per means house. Now here's one, a blockbuster right away. First of all, we've taken the name away from Egyptologists. Now we're going to take the main basis of their paradigm and pull the rug right out of it. The word pharaoh. Every single one of us, including myself, has used this word wrong. And yet, it's going to take a long time before this paradigm is going to change because it's so ingrained. Pharaoh, pharaoh, Greek word based on the Hebrew word per-o, which referred to the male king. The ancient term is per-ah, where the word pharaoh came from. It means the high house. It means the woman's house. We're talking about a civilization that was innately matriarchal matrilineal. Not only in prehistoric times, but in dynastic times. And this is something Egyptologists totally ignore, except for one, a brave woman named Dr. Margaret Murray. The first woman who ever got a PhD in the field, was totally alone for 50 years as the only woman in the field, who wrote a book in 1949 where she delineated the great importance the role of women had in ancient Egypt, in dynastic Egypt. But she was totally ignored, and is totally ignored today. So, I say to you, there were no male pharaohs. There were male kings, but they only got to rule by the basis of who they were chosen by. Now, we have to carefully select our words here. Hakim is always correcting me on this. There was no word wife, and there was no word husband in this ancient civilization. So the closest we can say is consort. The woman chose the male. Who she chose, because of her status in lineage, was allowed to rule as king. But I say to you right here, even though you see all the programs on television talking about Ramses II did this, Thutmose III did that, Khufu did this. None of these kings did anything. They were all, majority of them, figureheads. The civilization was matrilineal, matriarchal. The per-ah was the woman of the house. Why does Isis have a throne on her head? Because Isis is the throne. She gives her brother, Osiris, the right to rule by choosing him as her mate. And it's also a high chair that's on her head, because the woman, well, the term is Hemeti, Hemet. The Egyptologists translate Hemet as wife. There was no such concept. It means woman of power. Now, many of us are married, of course, would say, well, that's, my wife is a woman of power. But there's a difference, if you understand it intrinsically, of a definition of a word, woman of power, and wife, especially as it's been the last 5,000 years. So she's got a high chair on her head, because the woman is supposed to sit on a high-backed throne, chair, with her feet on a footrest, to be placed above everyone else and to be given homage. So this civilization was matrilineal, matriarchal. There were no male pharaohs, number one. Number two, another term, per-ka. Ka, we already mentioned what the ka was. The ka was the physical projection of the soul. So per is the house of the physical projection, that was the tomb. That's where the kat, the body, was laid. That was your tomb, per-ka, where the ka would be. Now, we have a term per-ba. Ba is translated, again, as spirit or soul. That which is not corporeal, that which does not deal with the death of the body, that which is eternal, which we call soul in our language, that was the temple. The per-ba was the temple. That's where people went to raise consciousness, to realize that we are multi-dimensional beings, that we are soul essences. So that's the temple. Now, the key phrase here, we're now going to pull some more rug out from Egyptologists, is the term per netter, the house of the netter. Now, netter. Egyptologists translate netter as god or goddess. But it took a brave man, a French alchemist, hermetic philosopher named R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, who first translated netter as aspect of deity, aspect of consciousness, not as we conceive of God, a divine principle. My teacher, Hakim, translates netter as a sense, as in our five senses. In fact, we're taught in our tradition that we're born innately with 360 senses. If we're only using 5, then 355 are laying dormant. But we all use these terms. You talk to someone and they say, I see what you're saying, but you're not using your eyes. I hear what you're saying, but you're not using your ears. We call that extrasensory perception. Well, that's basically what the netters were. They were those senses, those divine aspects of consciousness. So per netter is the house of the netter. What does that mean? Well, the Greeks also took the word netter and came up with the word nature. So it's the house of nature. We also take it to mean energy. And the Greeks then took this word per netter. They said it was very similar to a term they had, per meter or per midos, which means fire in the middle, which is our word pyramid. And that's where pyramid comes from. The Greek definition was fire in the middle. So even the Greeks themselves were never saying it was a tomb for anyone. But yet, we have the paradigm that pyramids were tombs for kings. Well, according to the indigenous tradition, we stated quite categorically and emphatically that it's an original intent. No one was to be ever buried in a pyramid. No one. They were energy devices. And we'll go into detail for you. So there's the basic paradigm structure to begin a whole new look at what the civilization is about. Per Oz, the high house. That's where Pharaoh comes from. Per Ka is the tomb. Per Ba, the temple. And per Neter, the pyramid. The house of energy, house of nature. So it became clear to us in working with my teacher, and we're going to condense this now fast so we can get into the visual, because that's where it is, that he was emphasizing certain concepts that he wanted me to concentrate on. One was within the larger framework of Kemet, which is a major civilization, he concentrated on certain sites, 7 of them to be exact, that he wanted me to focus on. They're all listed in my book. You're going to go with me from site to site in the slides. It's from Dashur in the south to Abu Washan in the north, which includes the famous sites of Sakara and Giza. That he said that this had a specific term to these sites, which he called Bu Wizard. Bu meaning land. Wizard is the correct term for Osiris. Now you've seen other people translate it as Osar, Asar, different things. Well, according to my teacher, wizard is the ancient word for Osiris. And it's where the word wisdom comes from. So these sites, they make up about 25 square miles, all had stone masonry pyramids, all had temples on them, working together as an active grid. And that's what we're going to discuss. And that's what my book, The Land of Osiris, is about. First, we start out redefining terms, defining the paradigms of chematology that I've just developed for you. And then in the second half of my book, I take you to each one of these sites, like we're going to go now in slide, to show you that each had pyramids. None of them were ever, and it's interesting enough that even Mark Lehner himself has stated that no evidence of a mummy or a burial has ever been found in any major pyramid in Egypt. And yes, here they are today, still contending with their assumptions, which they make as actual fact, that kings were buried in pyramids. So these sites all were linked by pyramids, and they all were linked by a very, very important facet that Hakim wanted me to concentrate on. And it's a facet that has been discussed. Dr. Reminick and even Denny spoke about it earlier. Water. Water. Hakim told me the secret to what we were going to bring forth in these teachings was to follow the water. What does that mean? Well, these people, these ancient Cometians, drilled miles and miles of tunnels straight through limestone bedrock, and I'm going to take you inside one of these in these slides. What for? To bring water to these sites. What did they use the water for? Not just for agriculture, not just for life, but for energy. So we're going to wrap this up at the end. I'll come back and tell you exactly how the dynamic worked, but water was the source of the energy in the pyramids. And I think it's best we get into the slides because we're going to spend a lot of time there. So if we could have the lights. It's probably best if I move over here. We got to go one back. There we are. And there it is. This is Egypt. And a lot of people don't realize that Egypt is a product of the Nile. So what really was the civilization was only this thin strip of green alluvial soil, Kemet, the black land, that was deposited by the Nile River. Oh, righto. I'll be right here then. Okay. You don't need to see me. And if you notice that most of the sites that people go to, Abydos, Thebes, where Karnak and Luxor are, Edfu, Sakara and Giza up here, are all on what looks like the left bank, the left side of the Nile. And the left is traditionally the land of the dead. That's where people are buried. Interestingly enough, my teacher Hakim tells us there was no word in the Comitian language for death. That's something that you just can't slough over. You have to think about that. There was no word in their language for death. When the body ceased to function, they just said somebody was going to the west or westing. But they had no concept of anything but eternal life as far as soul consciousness goes. And they were not polytheistic either. When we discussed the symbol of Neter, meaning 360 senses, then obviously these people are not worshiping 360 gods and goddesses. They were not polytheistic. Jews did not invent monotheism. Basic teachings at the heart of the Comitian system was a belief in one unifying principle. So they were not polytheistic pagans. But here's the river. Well, the tradition, what do we got, somebody else? Is there a feedback? What Hakim taught me is this was not the river of the ancient civilization. That the ancient river was out here, which is today Western Desert. That there once was a mighty, huge river, and I'm going to take you out there in slides, show you some of the evidence of this, that this is where the original civilization came from. The south, from Nubia and Central Africa, and from the west, from the Western Desert, is where the original people came and later moved into the Nile Valley. So all these sites, Sakara, Giza, and we'll have another map to show you, were originally on the east side of the ancient river and were living sites. So next slide. And there is Abd al-Hakim. And what he's pointing to is exactly what we discussed about. This is a stele, archaeological term for a stone slab that has writings on it. This stele is located near the modern Egyptian village of Mitrahena, which is near the ancient capital of Memphis, where we discussed. Menefer, generation of harmony. This is called the stele of Apries. What he's pointing to is Het Ka Ptah, right here, where the word Egypt comes from. And this is a pretty modern slab. This was about 600 BC, so this is based on a much older series of writings. But this is where Kemet comes from, right here. Het Ka Ptah, where Egypt where Egypt came from. Higipitos, right here. Next slide. Now, a lot of you may have been to Egypt. You may have been to the temple of Hathor in Dendara, but you would not see this unless you go to the roof. Why did they put it on the roof? Well, as I said, the template for all the things going on today, the priests in Egypt kept certain things only for themselves. Only there was what Shwala de Lubitsch delineates this very well. I recommend all his books. He developed a field called symbolist Egyptology, that there was an inner temple and an outer temple. The outer temple were your lay priests, your scribes. They basically were just the people who kept the functions of religion going. But the inner temple were the adepts, the masters, who kept all the information, the true knowledge, and kept it to themselves. That's why we say the template for today. So here at the roof of Dendara, this cartouche, French word cartouche, means bag of holding. It actually means grocery bag in French. It refers to a knot of papyrus, where Egyptologists will tell you was inscribed a king's name. Well, we say no. First of all, they were not names, they were titles. Each king had at least 5 different titles. But sometimes what's in a cartouche has a place name, a site name, or a tribal name. So it's not a king's name that's in a cartouche. What here is Per-Ah. This is the Per symbol, the house, Ah, the high house, the house of the woman. And where is she? She's right here. This is the symbol for Hathor, Horus in a hat, a place, the place of Horus. Hathor was the place of Horus. The woman defines the male. Hathor makes Horus, which also the ancient word was Heru, where the Greek word hero comes from. So here she is, the original Per-Ah, Hathor. And this is the sign for Pharaoh. This is where your word Pharaoh comes from. The high house. And there's a nice little sistrum down there, which Pat is selling on her table back there. Next slide. Here's a graphic done by my friend Bob Vaughter. Shows per netter. This is what the symbol for pyramid is. The house of the netter, house of energy. Per ba, the temple. They signified the soul as a bird. Why? A bird can fly off the earth. It's not restricted to the material or the corporal ground. So they saw that soul having the ability to transcend the material, transcend normal consciousness as a bird. So this is the sign for the temple. This is the sign for pyramid. Next. Now we show it to you in the field. Here's a stone slab of granite. It's at Abu Sir, one of the sites we'll take you to. Here is per netter. Here is the true symbol for pyramid. You're not going to find this in any textbook in Egyptology. In fact, Mark Lehner wrote in his book that he believes the symbol for pyramid was something he calls Mer pyramid. Mer means beloved, has nothing to do with pyramid, but that's what they're fostering. This is the term, per netter, where pyramid comes from. Next slide. Now, here's the map of Bu Wizard, the land of Osiris. Deals with Dashur in the south, Sakara, Abu Sir and Abu Ghurab, a small little village called Zawiyat el-Aryan, Giza and Abu Ruwash. This is Bu Wizard, the land of Osiris. About 25 square miles, all very ancient sites, living sites, not necropoli, all having stone masonry pyramids and temples on them, all constructed in a grid line. And out here is the Western Desert. And out here, what you find today is 4 major oases. Farafra, Baharia, Dakhla, and Karga. And we took a trip there in 1998, which I'll show you in the slides, documented in my book, to find the evidence of the ancient river, and it's definitely there. So that's all the way out here. That's the original civilization. So these all were east of that site. They were all ancient living sites, not places of the dead. Next slide. Okay, that's got to be focused a little. Great, thank you. This is Dashur. There are 2 major pyramids at Dashur, and what's great, when you come to Egypt with us in January, if you come or you go by yourself, Dashur is now open to the public. First in 1995, so before this we couldn't visit this place. It was closed, it was military installations. But now Dashur is open to the public, and we can go in this pyramid. It's a sturdy climb. Those who've been in the Great Pyramid, it's even tougher than going in the Great Pyramid, but you can do it. This is what's known as the Red Pyramid or the North Pyramid. There are 2 major pyramids, per netters, at Dashur. Why it's called the Red Pyramid, it's a particular tint of the limestone. Now this is not as big as Giza. It's maybe between 250, 300 feet high, much more broad at a 43-degree angle. But you climb up here a long way, you go down about 250 feet, squatting in a duck walk, and you come into the main chambers. And this is an ancient per netter. No evidence of a burial has ever been found in this pyramid. And yet Egyptologists staunchly adhere to the fact that this was a tomb for a king. Next slide. This is inside the Red Pyramid at Dashur. It also needs a little, it's not self-focusing, huh? Okay. The reason why we show this is to show the interior. These are all limestone blocks. Look how precise they're fitted. And I'll stop here and mention a colleague's name who you'll hear me talk about often. My good friend Christopher Dunn, who's written the book, The Giza Power Plant, which I recommend to everyone. And you'll see if you read my book that you haven't read Chris's book, you'll have to. Chris is an engineer, master craftsman, almost 40 years of field experience, who went to Egypt in the mid-'80s and back engineered the Great Pyramid and basically said it's impossible for this just to be a tomb for a king. It's a machine. And we'll explain to you how it operates as a machine. But what he looked at was the precision in cutting and fitting of the stones. Now they want you to believe that they put these on their backs and they put this into position this way. They want you to believe that. But I look at you what I call here a mother stone. This is one single block of limestone, maybe about 15 feet long. It weighs 100 tons if it weighs an ounce. And it's just balanced on these other stones here, allowing the opening to come through. Now if you want to believe, as Zahiwas will tell you, and he actually will tell you with a straight face that they have found the workers' cemetery at Giza. In fact, he just had a recent special on the Learning Channel on Discovery where he was saying this. We have found the workers' cemetery. And what do we find? We find the skeletons of these 20-year-old men and women. And what they show is their fuses, their back vertebrae are damaged. And that's damaged because of the great weight that they had to lift carrying these blocks to build the pyramid. 20-year-old women carrying blocks to build the pyramid. And they say that with straight, and they laugh at us. Okay. The precision is for a reason. We will discuss why. Next slide. And here's one of the reasons. This is the upper chamber, one of the upper walls of the middle chamber of this red pyramid. It looks very similar to the Grand Gallery, any of you that's been in the Great Pyramid. Why are the recessed walls? Egyptologists never venture an explanation. Why are the walls recessed? Well, I'll tell you now, and we'll elaborate on this point, for the fact of acoustic harmonic resonance. Key phrase. Sound, vibration, harmonic resonance. Particular stone used, limestone, sedimentary rock, the igneous stones of granite, basalt, and diorite, which contain thousands of pieces, particularly the rose quartz granite that was used in ancient Egypt, which comes from Aswan, which I'll show you, full of thousands of bits of mica, of rose quartz, for amplification of sound, for harmonic resonance. That's why the walls were recessed. Amplifying energy. Next slide. This is the so-called bent pyramid. Also, at Dashur. Now, Egyptology, again, I'm sorry I have to keep doing that. I think it needs to be, thank you. I thought it was autofocus. Egyptologists say, first of all, this site of Dashur was a site where a certain king, who they named Sneferu, wanted to be buried. Actually, this man is supposed to be the father of the man who built the Great Pyramid. So he started this tradition, and his son continued it. Again, this whole paradigm of fathers and sons. That's what the civilization's about. Well, they're saying that when they started building this pyramid, they built it at this particular 55-degree angle. Why? They don't say why, but they just chose this 55-degree angle, and then the engineers all of a sudden came forward and said, wait a minute, we can't go any further. The internal buttressing, the internal superstructure of the pyramid won't hold this. We have to change the angle or it's going to collapse. So they changed it to this 43-degree angle to complete it, which the other pyramid is based on. Then they say they went and built the other pyramid because Sneferu came along and said, no, I don't want this pyramid as my tomb anyway. Go build me another one. And they built the red pyramid. Well, Hakim laughs and he says, there was no accidents. This is not by accident. This pyramid is built at two specific angles for a definite reason. And that reason is this pyramid produces two frequencies of sound. Now, Sneferu, the term I said, supposedly a king's name. Well, the Egyptologists translated it as he of beauty, translating the term Nefer as beauty, also meaning completion. Well, we translate Nefer as harmony. Very different word. And what Hakim is saying, Sneferu means double harmony, and was not a king's title. It may actually refer to this pyramid itself. So it was a site name, not a person's name. And this pyramid produces two different frequencies of sound. Unfortunately, in the other pyramid we showed you, the red pyramid, we got inside and we've done sound experiments. We're able to determine the frequencies. I've not yet been able to get in this pyramid. Every time we get there, there's always somebody that has the key. One of the keepers, as Hakim calls them. And we've never been able to find that person, so we've never been able to get in. Actually, this is closed to the public, so you're not supposed to go inside. Supposedly it's dangerous. But eventually I know we'll get inside here and do some mapping of sound frequencies to determine actually producing two tones, two frequencies of sound. And that's what its purpose is. Next slide. Now here's the bent pyramid from a distance, showing the foreground. The reason why we show this slide is it's not as obvious in the slide, but I'll take you there and show you, is that the land slopes from west to east. This is looking west. We are in the east looking west. And the ground is sloping from the east to the west. So the Nile River, as she is today, would be over here. It would be 8 miles to the east of this site. So if that, the Egyptologists counter our arguments by saying, well, the old Nile is where the water came from and flooded this site at one time. But the ground layout belies this. It's showing a sloping from west to east from another source of water. And we say all these pyramids were connected with water. There was water flowing all around. There was an artificial lake here, and I'll show you more of that. So that the ground sloping from west to east was from a water source from the west, not from the east, from the ancient river. Next slide. Now, here's an interesting parallel. About half a mile east of those other pyramids is this pyramid. Now, this is a pyramid, according to Egyptologists, built in the so-called Middle Kingdom pyramid, around perhaps 1800 to 2000 BC. The other pyramids you're seeing, Egyptologists date at around 2600 BC. So we're saying that a period of 700 years has only elapsed between those stone masonry pyramids and this pyramid from the Middle Kingdom. Look at it. It's virtually in ruins, made mostly of mud brick with very little limestone block. This is a perka, not a pernetter. This was a glorified tomb. Never was a pernetter. Never is a true masonry pyramid. Cannot possibly have been built with the same engineering skills as the other pyramids I just showed you, and will show you at Giza. So this is a dynastic per Ka. Now it's even debated, because no mummy's ever been found inside here either, whether it actually was an actual tomb or a symbolic tomb. The dynastic Cometians, Egyptians, were famous for building symbolic tombs as well as actual tombs, and that's why so many of them are empty when they go inside. But this was never a true pyramid. Obviously, in ruins, could not have been built by the same people with the same technology. Next slide. Here we're at the famous site of Sakara. Now, Sakara is named after the netter Sokar. Sokar is one of the netters of the West, supposedly of the dead. So the standard paradigm of Sakara is it was a necropolis and nothing else. Centuries upon centuries of the dynastic people buried their dead here. Well, we have a very different story. But what's here, again, we need a little, unless it's just me. There it is. Here's the famous step pyramid, and this construction complex supposedly connected to the step pyramid. Step pyramid is considered to be the first true pyramid if you follow the chronology of Egyptology. That they just decided to build layer upon layer, and then they had steps, and then finally they faced them later, and this was the first pyramid. Well, this is wrong. This is not a pyramid. This structure is, again, a glorified per-Ka. It was a tomb, which is called mastaba in Arabic, which means bench. Normally what they did originally when they buried people is in a desert environment, they would put people in the ground. Well, jackals would come along and dig up the bodies and eat the bodies. Well, they said, well, that wasn't such a good idea, the priests, that we should do all these elaborate funerary functions, and here comes a jackal along to eat up the body. So we'll put a stone slab on top of the tomb, and that's called mastaba. Well, this is just a glorified per-Ka, where one layer was built up, above, never functioned as a true pernetter. Built with very small limestone and mud brick blocks, not anywhere the construction ability that you would see at Giza, at the Great Pyramid or the other two pyramids. So this is not a true pyramid. And this, even in itself, we date 1,300 years earlier than Egyptologists dated. So it was not dedicated to any king that they know of. But this is not a true pyramid. And this structure and these structures are not contiguous. These structures, built of very old yellowish limestone blocks, are thousands of years older than this structure. And these structures were built for very different reasons. Next slide. Now we're going to show you something. It builds into the paradigm now of the tunnels in the water. This is a series of slides my friend calls the Sakara sequence. Here, the step pyramid, built one period, maybe around 6,000 years ago. This structure is built over 12 to 20,000 years ago, part of the ancient Cometian civilization. This wall is dynastic. It's not as old as this structure here. It was built as a retaining wall. But then when I'm standing here, Hakim is telling me, Steve, keep moving to the left and taking pictures. Next slide. And what do you see? Exposed to the world to see. We didn't have to do any excavations. This is already out in the open for you to see. When you go on your tour guide buses and tour buses, they take you in here, they take you back here. They never take you down here. But if you slip away and you walk a half a mile south, you would see this. And you're going to see more. Here is an elaborate underground tunnel system right through the limestone bedrock, exposed to the world, because it's already been excavated. Next slide. Further to the left, look at these tunnels going down. Tunnels crisscrossing here. Tunnels going straight through limestone bedrock. Now, if you want to believe they did that with stone pounders and copper chisels, there's a bridge in Brooklyn we can talk about after. You want to believe that? They say it with a straight face. Yeah, stone pounders. Well, you're going to see even more. Let's go to another slide. We go further in, closer. Look how that goes down. Look at this. Now, mathematicians in the audience. Does anybody recognize this symbol? Pi. Greeks supposedly invented pi. But every Greek mathematician, from Pythagoras to Thales to Euclid, went and got initiated in Egypt. And this is straight through limestone bedrock, drilled straight through. Now, here's the real kicker. He tells me, move forward and shoot down. Next slide. And there it is. Straight through limestone bedrock with almost right angles, smooth walls. And this tunnel, Hakim estimates, go down 300 meters, 1,000 feet, and ends in water. An elaborate hydraulic system of bringing water to these sites, crisscrossing like natural arteries of the earth do, and we'll get back to that. So, you think this was done with copper chisels and stone pounders? And these are all over. I can show you many of these. They're exposed to the world to see. And how does Mark Lehner interpret this? Well, he says, these, it's great, I'll get to how Zagi interprets it. But Mark Lehner says, well, these were tunnel systems that led to the pyramid where the king's underground passages were, where they stored the grave goods. But he never explains how they were drilled and go down 300 meters. Zahir Was, on his website, and I do not lie, on his website states that the tunnels at Giza were used as swimming pools for the dynastic people. And that's his interpretation. And he laughs at us. Next slide. Now, at Sakara. Sakara, we could talk all day about Sakara. But at Sakara, a little tighter, I think. Great. At Sakara, the south of the step pyramid are these niches in the wall. There originally were 28 of them, 14 on each side. There's only a few still extant. The original purpose of Sakara was as a center for healing by the use of sound. Now, many people today are working with these modalities. 3 names I can drop out. Don Goldman, who's in Boulder. Jonathan Goldman, Don Campbell, and Tom Kenyon are 3 significant people who are doing great work in sound today, as sound is using for healing and uplifting consciousness. Well, at this site, over 10,000 years ago, people would come to be healed by the use of sound. And I give an example in my book. It's a simple situation where people would put their heads in these niches. A healer priestess would intone a sound. The patient would intone a sound. The healer priestesses would see an MRI in their mind of the person, see their blood, their lymph in their mind, would see where the energy blockages were. As soon as they perceived where the energy blockages were, a telepathic communication was made between healer and patient, and the healing process began. Because as any true healer knows, we only heal ourselves. No one heals anyone else. All we do is become conscious of a problem, and the body takes over, and we heal ourselves. So at this site, for thousands and thousands of years, was use of sound for healing. And someone in the audience a couple of days ago asked me what I thought about Imhotep. Well, Imhotep was a title of a whole group of priest physicians who knew the secret of using healing by sound. And the one character who Egyptologists consider to be the Imhotep, who they think built this complex for a king named Zoser, which he did not, Hakim tells us was the last person to actively teach this sound. And this is 2700 BC. You're talking 4,700 years ago. This knowledge now has been underground and dormant, now coming up again. Next slide. Now, we do this for a reason. Here's the old step pyramid. Here's the complex, which you all can go to right in front of it. It's all sand today, but I'll take you there and we'll just dig a little bit in the sand and you'll come up with little pieces of alabaster under the sand. This whole floor was once alabaster. Solid alabaster. What is alabaster? Somebody asked. Alabaster is an Italian word. Hakim calls it African crystal. And you're going to see other examples of alabaster before we're finished. Very abundant all throughout Egypt today. Alabaster, a very high crystalline stone, beautiful stone to make vases and statues out of. Well, it's also used for sound transmission. All the floor here was alabaster. Every floor of every temple in both dynastic and pre-dynastic Kemet was made of alabaster for transmission of sound. Frequency, vibration, you've heard those terms. Again, Denny spoke about that a lot earlier today. Vibration. Frequency, vibration, sound. Next slide. Now, this is going to have to be tightened up. Thank you. Here's a little offshoot. We go into this in my book, something that Frank Joseph might be interested in if he's listening, if he hasn't read my book. In 1997, I had a meeting with Hakim in Alameda, California. We were preparing for an expedition that we were going to do in September that year to go in the field and gather a lot of the information that you're seeing. A lot of these slides were taken in 1997. He told me, as an offshoot, he was going to show me evidence of a Mayan temple in Egypt. Now, I had never heard anything like that. And immediately the bells and whistles went off in my head. Here's my 15 minutes of fame. If I can establish that there was a Mayan temple in ancient Egypt, my place in the history books is assured. So I was really excited. So here we go to Egypt, and we're doing other things. And I can take you to this site today. It's about a mile and a half south of the Step Pyramid. Is this little area, which is a chapel supposedly built by this character who the Egyptologists say was named Maya. But Hakim says, no. Maya was not a name, it was a title. He had the title of Maya. Well, what does Maya mean? Well, curiously enough, if you go to Egypt today, and you go into any of the shops, and you ask for a bottle of Maya, they give you bottled water. Now, they have many words for water. Another one I'm going to show you, askat, is the ancient word from the Cometians, but they had many words for water. Dr. Remnick was talking about how there's different types of water. Victor Schauberger, who I'm going to talk about, one of the great geniuses of the study of water, once identified that there were 33 different types of water. Now, in what university in the world do they teach hydrology classes that there's 33 different types of water? Well, the ancient people had many different names for water, which show that they knew that. But Maya is one of them. So, well, anyway, here we're looking at him. Well, he's depicted as a typical dynastic Cometian. He's got his offerings for the afterlife. This is for his ka in his little temple, chapel. And, okay, I'm looking at it and say, well, all right. Next slide. Now, here's the key. I forgot to show these through my little sign. So here's one I want you to look at. If I teach you any hieroglyphs, here's one that you should remember. This symbol right here. This is askat, symbol for water in the ancient Cometian language. This is Nefer, the symbol for Nefer. Again, Egyptologists translate Nefer as beautiful. We translate it as harmony. So what does this phrase mean? I have a whole chapter on this in my book, which I showed to Dr. Remnick. Harmony of water. So why did this gentleman have this key phrase put here in the harmony of water? What it's stating here, if you could read the whole glyphs, it's saying this person was wise, was a wise priest, because he understood the harmony of water. Before we're finished, I'll let you know completely what that means. Next slide. And this is him. This is Maya, with the original paint still evident after 3,300 years, by the way. Now, is that a Mayan nose? Is he an indigenous Central American Indian? Is that stretching the point? It is a stretch. So at this point, I became crestfallen. I said to Hakim, look, I understand what you're saying. I respect what you're saying. But I can't go with this. If I put this up on a stage in front of a whole bunch of academicians to begin with, they'll laugh me off the stage. What is to show here that this person is a Central American Mayan Indian, an indigenous person? He looks Cometian. He said, well, Stephen, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Here he is in Kemet. Here he is being buried in Kemet, having his tomb created. So, of course, he's depicting himself in the style as a Cometian. I said, but Hakim, there's nothing here for me. So I was crestfallen. The light bulbs went off. There goes the 15 minutes of fame. It's over. Nothing. Well, as Hakim points out to me, and Hakim is unique, and I needed to point this out. He's unique as an indigenous wisdom keeper because he is Western trained. He has bachelor's degrees in archaeology and Egyptology from Cairo University, speaks at least 5 languages that I know of, can probably fake it in about 5 others, and he has uniquely been chosen to bring these teachings to the West. Most of the indigenous wisdom keepers in Egypt don't even speak English and don't usually bother with any of us. They keep their tradition to themselves. Why he has been chosen, I will explain very much at the end to wrap it up, to bring it out now. So, one of the other keepers at the site who didn't speak English saw that I was perplexed. And with his senses being aware more than most of us are, he knew something was up. So he kept pointing to me, come here, come here, come here. I want to show you something. So we went around the back, and there was a little chapel that was all boarded up. So we just took the boards off, opened up the doors, and the next slide. And this was on the ceiling. That's not Cometian, folks. Now, can we tighten it up so everybody can see? Okay. Stupidly, I only took one picture. I got so excited. I took one picture and then put down the camera, and it's had to fall to my knees in front of this. It's a series of geometric squares and circles in different colors. The colors are important, but that's not Cometian. Nowhere and anywhere in Egyptian archaeology will you find anything else like this. So immediately, I took this picture, made copies of it, and through the help of a woman named Aluna Joy Yashkin, who's a student of Mayan daykeeper Hunbat's men, I sent him a copy of this picture. And Hunbat's graciously answered my letter just a couple of months later, which is pretty amazing as far as that time frame goes. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to go there and say a Mexican minute, okay? Because there's an Egyptian minute too, and I'll show you an example of an Egyptian minute later. But he said clearly, he wrote back to me, and his letter is reproduced in toto in an appendix in my book saying, oh yes, this is the language of the ancient Maya people. I recognize this. In fact, I can recognize some of the symbols. Well, that being enough, I have a good friend. Her name is Flor de Mayo. She's a Mayan curandera, priestess, who lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She has attended several conferences that I've done. Another offshoot research I've done is on crystal skulls. That's why we have crystal skulls with us, why we're so connected to the Swansons who sell crystal skulls. Anybody wants to buy a crystal skull, please see the booth in the back where there's an incredible amount of crystal skulls, probably the best selection in the world of anybody to buy. And I've given lectures on crystal skulls for Dr. Chet Snow in Sedona, Arizona. And Flor de Mayo has been a speaker there. So I came up to her in 1998, when we were both speakers there, and showed her a reprint of this and said, Flor de Mayo, I'm not going to tell you anything about this. What do you get from this? And she was speechless. She couldn't answer. I said, can I hold it for a few days and give you an answer? Yes. Okay, here it is Sunday. This was Friday when I gave it to her. We're ready to go home. I said, Flor de Mayo, do you have anything on this? She couldn't answer. I can't articulate it in words, she said. I said, well, can you give me anything? She said, okay, is this from Mexico? I said, no, it's not from Mexico. She said, is it from Peru? I said, no, it's not from Peru. This is from Sakara, Egypt. She went, Egypt? She said, can I show this picture to my teacher? I said, of course. And her teacher is well-known, respected Mayan, a daykeeper and wisdom keeper, Don Alejandro, who's one of the wisdom keepers and elders of the Quiche Maya through all of Guatemala. So we did that. The next year, we came back for another Crystal Skull conference. Flor de Mayo saw me, ran up to me, hugged me, and said, Stephen, I've got an answer for you. I said, what? She said, Don Alejandro said, this is ancient Mayan. He recognizes it. In fact, then, Don Alejandro went on to tell a story to her, that according to the Mayan tradition, the Mayans came from the Pleiades. And when they came from the Pleiades, they came to four corners of the earth. One, of course, Central America, Mexico, and the other, ancient Kemet, Africa. So when I told this story to Hakim, he said, sure. And he called those people that came to ancient Africa the Nagamaya. The Nagamaya. So when I came back to Egypt in 1999, told the story to Hakim, he was, first of all, overjoyed that there was an indigenous confirmation to find. He could care less how many Egyptologists or Mayan archaeologists would confirm it, but he was overjoyed that an indigenous elder would confirm it. And then he said to me, oh yes, Nagamaya. Nag is an ancient Comitian word which means tribe. So Naga Maya. Maya could be a word for water. Could it also mean from those who came from across the water? So does Naga Maya mean the tribe that came from across the water in the ancient Comitian language? Possibly. I leave with you the phrase that my good friend David Hatchett Childress, a great researcher and author, who's also the publisher of my book, and also a man named Gunnar Thompson, who's written an incredible book called American BC, American Discovery, documenting how many people came to America before Columbus. He was one of the last to come, and saying that they used the statement, the oceans are not barriers, they're highways. The oceans are not barriers, they're highways. There are people now saying, well, there's evidence that we were doing transoceanic travel 4,000 years ago. I'm saying to you, we were doing transoceanic travel over 10,000 years ago. But here's evidence that there was a Mayan living in Egypt 3,300 years ago, when Mayan archaeologists say there wasn't even a Mayan civilization. And that is what we call diffusionist archaeology. Next slide. Now here we are at Abu Sir. Abu Sir. Abu Sir in Arabic means the father of sardines. Abu Sir. And what does that mean? There's been no significant water sources here supposedly for thousands of years. So father of sardines, it makes no sense. No. Hakim would say, no, Stephen. Abu Sir, Boo Wizard, Boo Wizard, Abu Sir. So the word Abu Sir definitely comes from Boo Wizard, the land of Osiris, and this may have been a central area of the Boo Wizard civilization we talked about. So what do we have here? Another pyramid, supposedly built as a tomb for a king, although no body was ever found in, no grave goods, no evidence, no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs that anyone was ever buried in there. And they say that this was a whole funerary complex for the king. Well, what do we see here? We see the evidence of an ancient lake bed, because these reeds are still going into the sand and finding some water somewhere, way, way down. And they're still living. And what is happening here? Well, here is an aqueduct that's leading to the pyramid. And again, we are looking west, folks. The Nile, as she would put it today, would be back that way. Couldn't possibly be involved in this. The whole terrain is sloping from west to east for the water to flow down this aqueduct to this ancient lake. And the water going underneath the pyramid for sound, for energy transmission. Next slide. Here we are right in front of this so-called pyramid of this character who they say was named Sahura. There was no Sahura. Here's his hieroglyph right here, supposedly, his cartouche. Hakim is standing right here. Well, first of all, we look at this as a granite pillar. And again, based on the work of Christopher Dunn, this is extremely finely polished in granite. It's about 15 feet tall. And copper chisels again in stone pounders. Well, we also say, and Hakim is very clear to point out to me, and here's one of the major mistakes that Egyptologists make, is they date these structures by what they see as inscriptions. So as they see these markings here, okay, there's a cartouche here with somebody they think was named Sahura. So this granite beam was constructed during this time period. Nonsense. We're telling you this granite beam was standing there thousands of years, and later they came and chiseled these marks in there. The same people that chiseled these marks are not the people who made this structure, because they did not have the technology anymore. It was dormant, not lost, but dormant, as I said. So what do we see around here, though? This is basalt. This is basalt. Granite columns back here. Where Hakim is standing, he said, is the remnants of an ancient dock where boats would come up to the pyramid, where there was water all here. Water coming underneath the pyramid and being used. And boats would be able to dock there. And we found evidence, clear evidence, of docks there, made out of granite and basalt. The ancient civilization, over 10,000 years ago. Next slide. Now here he's going, on his way to Abu Ghurab, which is very interesting. We'll take a little time at Abu Ghurab. But what do we see here? Now Mark Lehner, in response to John Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schoch's work in redating the Sphinx, saying that the Sphinx has to be older than they say it is, and we're going to get to the Sphinx again, and we'll talk about that in detail, because of the water erosion that's present in the body and the enclosure of the Sphinx. Well, Mark Lehner said, well, if there's an older civilization that the Sphinx dates to, then show me a potsherd. Show me some evidence. What you have here are thousands and thousands of limestone and granite fragments. Obviously, there was some other huge structures here at one time. Obviously. You also find bone chips here and evidence of sacrificial meals, that the dynastic people returned here thousands and thousands of years to do veneration at this site because it was an ancient site. But what we are proposing here and what we have found evidence of is that there was once a great wall here and here that was an aqueduct where water was coming to the site. Huge limestone walls to channel, just like the aqueduct in California today, from Southern California to Northern California, bringing water to this site. And there are thousands of bits of pottery here that reflect a plethora of different styles, that even show pottery that was before the wheel, thrown by hand, to then later pieces thrown by hand, by a wheel. So what you have here is evidence of thousands and thousands of years of migration, immigration, of occupation of this area, not mentioned by Egyptologists. Now he's on his way to Abu Ghurab, and let's go to Abu Ghurab. Abu Ghurab means the father of crow's nests, and there's a good reason for this name. What was at Abu Ghurab, which is virtually in ruins today, is a huge mound, not a huge mound, but a mound where there once was an obelisk on top of it. The obelisk is all gone. But here is the Commission term for obelisk. Here, of course, is the symbol for it, Ib-Ra. Ib is the heart. This is supposed to be a heart. Ib-Ra, Ra is one of the phases of the sun. People are incorrect when they say Ra was the sun god. Ra was only 1/5 of the concept of the sun. There were 5 stages of the sun. I delineate them completely in my book. They represent 5 stages of consciousness, 5 stages of human development. So Ra was the adolescent stage, the sun at noon. It's only one part of the concept of sun. But Ibra, obelisk was supposed to represent a heart beam, a heart image of Ra, or a sunbeam. So captured in granite, which is what the obelisks are usually made of, was the energy of the sun, and that's what an obelisk represented. We also have stated to people that what obelisks really were acupuncture needles for the earth. Put in certain power places, your grid lines where your ley lines cross, the obelisk was there to control seismic energy. And this is why, for thousands and thousands of years, when these pyramids and these obelisks were functioning in northern Africa, there were no major earthquakes. They dissipated the seismic energy. Just one function they could burn. But particularly, that's what obelisks did. And this is a granite slab that's at Abu Ghurab that shows you there is the symbol for obelisk. Greek word obeliskos means a large spit. They thought obelisks were the barbecue spits of the gods. So that's where your word obelisk comes from. Next slide. Here we are. on top of the mound, looking down. The site is virtually in ruins. Now, Egyptologists tell you this was a sun cult, which came at the end of the 5th dynasty, and it was a worship of Ra, and these are sun temples, and it was all built to this king named Nusurure, and it was all for him. Well, indigenous traditions tells us a very different story, that this is a very, very ancient site. And what you have here, and this is all raw alabaster here, not limestone, is what's called a hotep. They're each here, 1, 2, 3, 4. In all 4 directions, it's an altar. Now, Egyptologists define hotep as completed. Neferhotep, the completion of what they would say beauty. Well, we translate hotep as a table of offerings. And this is exactly what this is. An ancient altar, not to any king and not to any god, but to whom, I discuss in my book, we'll go back to it, maybe to people that came as an ancient landing group hundreds of thousands of years ago. Because one of the things Hakim maintained about this site is this is an ancient landing site. For whom he's never clear. When, obviously we're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago. It is part of the indigenous tradition again that there was contact. So again, but it's a paradox here. I don't say aliens built the Great Pyramid, but aliens built us, or we are the aliens, or our DNA is not all terrestrial, et cetera, et cetera. So this was an altar for someone many, many tens of thousands of years ago. Now, there's also some very interesting structures back here that we're going to discuss. Next slide. Now, here's why it's called Fathers of Crow's Nests. Here we are standing on the mound, and you can see the pyramids at Abu Sir. You can see the step pyramid at Sakara. If you turn the other direction, you can see Giza. Great sight line. All the pyramids are in a line, but a curved line. And in deference to Robert Bouval, which I'll discuss when we come back to Giza, they are not aligned. The pyramids at Giza are not aligned to the belt of Orion. But that's something we'll discuss. And I really don't like to put down other people's work. Everybody's got their opinion, but this is the indigenous tradition. And this sight line shows all pyramids were in a line, a curved line, which I document in my book as a Fibonacci spiral. Next slide. Now here was a little closer view of the hotep. Shows all 4 directions. That's the hotep symbol here. And it's a little centerpiece, all of alabaster. And we're going to move in closer. So let's look at it closer. Next slide. Now, here it is, close up. Here's another example of Chris Dunn's thesis of advanced machining had to be present. Again, this is alabaster. It's a crystalline stone, not easy to carve. And there's distinct evidence here of circular tool marks, of high-degree polish marks. We speculate that the ancient Cometians had a portable ultrasonic drill. What was it made of? We'll get back to that. But that's how these things were carved, by ultrasonic machining. And these are precision cut angles. Of course, it's destroyed now. You can see where they've been chipped out by the Arabs who sell pieces to the tourists. But this was once precisely machined out of solid alabaster. Next slide. Now, here are these unique little structures again. All out of alabaster too, little squares. We're going to move in closer and examine these closer. Next slide. Now, here they are. It looks like stone, but it's raw alabaster. It is a crystalline stone. And it has these unusual gears on the top. Gear things. What for? Again, Chris Dunn is of the opinion that nothing was just purely aesthetic. Sure, there were things done for aesthetic reasons, but there had to be a function for the reason they did these things. And a reason there had to be an absolute function for why things were done so precise and so accurate. So, Egyptologists say that these, particularly German Egyptologist Ludwig Borchardt, stated that these were basins for ritual slaughter of animals. Let's move in a little closer and see. Again, you can't actually see it in the slide, but I could take you there and show you. If we could look close, you will see circular polish marks, not from copper chisels, not from dolerite pounders. Something spinning very rapidly polished these stones. And that's why we hypothesize ultrasonic machining. Next slide. Now here's Abdel Hakim examining them. They say these were ritual basins for the slaughter of animals. Well, no blood, no bone has ever been found there. And I'll show you another reason. Next slide. Now, it's coming off a little bit. Perfectly round circles here at the top, bored right through the alabaster. Again, do you think they did this by hand? If they did, they were pretty amazing. This is perfectly round, and another slide will show you there's circular groove marks also. But the hole is at the top. So Ludwig Borchardt is telling us that these were ritual basins for the slaughter of animals, and then they gather up the blood for ritual reasons. But duh, shouldn't the hole be at the bottom? You know, liquid finds its own void. It's at the top. the blood would have never gone up there and never come out there. No. Hakim says there was another reason for this, and he speculates that some device was attached to here, something spinning, something rotating, something for exhaust here. Was this part of a landing craft, a landing platform? That's speculation. You know, that's Zachariah Sitchin land, but it's possible. They certainly were not for gathering liquid coming through because they would be at the bottom. Next slide. And here, there it is. Where this coin is, shows you that they're groove marks. Groove marks. Somebody drilled this core out with a huge drill device, perfectly drilled, rotating at a very rapid feed rate. And again, I have to defer to Chris Dunn on these things. He's, like I said, almost 40 years in the field doing this. He understands these things, and he can actually tell you what the feed rate was to make these type of grooves, and it's thousands of rotations per second. And this is alabaster, pure raw alabaster. Next slide. And this slide is a little cockeyed again. It didn't work out. Go ahead, it's okay. Thank you. Where the tape marks and where the ruler is for scale, there are definite signs of ultrasonic machining marks here, of marks. It didn't come out as well in the photographs as I would have liked, so we have to take you there and show you in person. But they're there. Circular groove marks that this was polished by some type of sophisticated machine device. Next slide. Now we had her. She. Why she? Why her? Sphinx, as the Arabs say. Well, first of all, you know, Zahir Was calls him he. Every time he does on these specials, I cringe and I wince. And Teresa can tell you that she has to hold me back, you know, from wanting to smash the television. He always says, he, the Sphinx, he is showing himself. Well, she, according to the indigenous tradition, because she represents an aspect of the Great Mother. She never represented any male king whatsoever. She's an aspect of the Great Mother. And she is the Alpha and the Omega, because she's the original construction of this civilization. He dates the pyramid, the Sphinx, as being 54,000 years old. In her original, this is not how she originally appeared. She's been recarved. The head's been recarved many times, so that's not the original head. The body has also been altered with. Originally, she was just the head and the forepaws, 54,000 years ago. And who is she? The Cometians in their mythology were that the sky, reversed against a lot of indigenous teachings, the sky was feminine. The sky was the Great Mother. They called her Nut, N-U-T, Nut. And I still hear people say nut sometimes. People have written books about Egypt, but never been there, never talked to an indigenous wisdom keeper. They say nut. 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 The oo is in Asian languages. Oh, the U is always an oo sound. Nut was the sky mother. She represents all that's created and all that's uncreated. The mother of all. When Nut decided to manifest upon the earth, she spit on the earth. And where she spit sprang the Sphinx. And her spit is called Tefnut, T-E-F-N-U-T, if you need to write it down. Tefnut, which literally means the spittle of Nut. So she was the first creation. And she's represented as a lioness-human combination, lioness-woman combination. Now, many of you know that there's supposedly many lioness netters or goddesses of the Egyptians. Tefnut is one. There's another one called Menchet, Mut, and Sekhmet, one of our favorites. Sekhmet literally means the power. Henmeti comes from Sekhmet, woman of power. So Sekhmet literally means power. The feminine was the power to these people. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is how she first appeared in 1992 when I saw her. They had the scaffolding there. They were doing this repair work, which Hakim calls mendination, not restoration. All they do is mend something. They put something off, so 5 years from now it'll fall off again, and they can repeat it again. Because all the repair work they've done is all collapsing, all falling apart. She's throwing it off. She's going to throw it off. She's eventually going to collapse, she's told me. She will no longer be there. She's going to totally disintegrate. But that's part of the awakening. That's part of the unveiling. So she throws off all the repair work that they do. And it's been repaired all through dynastic times. In fact, the time period where the first repair work was done comes out being the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom when she was supposedly built by the Egyptologists. So they built her and then they had to repair her right after that. Does that make sense? Next slide. Here she is in profile. Now we do the profile. I wrote an article in 1995 for World Explorer magazine, was then reprinted in other magazines, where I speculated that the face of the Sphinx as she appears today is that of a black African female, not a white male king. It's not the original face, but this face today is that of a black African woman. Why? Because this was a king, perhaps the first king of the first dynasty, who had the face of the Sphinx recarved to honor his mother, his lineage. But that's not the original face. She originally was a lioness human face. But as it is today, is not a male king's face. John Anthony West took a forensic artist with him in 1993, former Detective Sergeant Frank Domingo, New York City Forensics Department, forensic artist. He examined the face of the Sphinx with a statue of supposed the king Khafra to the Greeks, who had the Sphinx carved. He compared the two faces by what we call biometric analysis, comparing the angles of the face, et cetera, and said they are absolutely not the same person. That this is not the face of anybody named Khafra or Khephren. I say her name was Nitkotep, and she was an African matriarch, the mother of the first king of the first dynasty. Next slide. Here shows the erosion. John Anthony West, Robert Schoch talk about this rolling erosion in the body, and this we can talk about that real quickly. This shows water erosion, not from just flash floods, as so many people have tried to explain. It talks water beating down for thousands of years, extensive rainfall to cause this type of erosion. There hasn't been that type of a rainfall in this area of the world for at least 8,000 years, makes the Sphinx at least 8,000 years old, at least 4,000 years older than Egyptologists say that she is. We say she's 54,000 years old. Next slide. And this is the east face of the Great Pyramid. A lot of people may have not noticed this, that on top of the limestone bedrock is this whole series of basalt stones. Huge, hard, igneous rock, basalt that covers the limestone. Why? For harmonic resonance. Next slide. Now, quickly, this theory. Christopher Dunn has a theory in his book that the source of energy, the Great Pyramid, was a power plant, and it producing radio waves and microwaves by virtue of its shape, construction, etc. It also produced hydrogen gas as fuel, as energy. He claims that he thinks that chemicals were used to produce this hydrogen gas, in particular anhydrous zinc and dilute hydrochloric acid, reacting under the right conditions, will produce hydrogen gas. Well, here's some evidence that he may be correct. Here's the north wall of the Queen's chamber showing dark stain in the limestone. And in my book, it's in black and white. That's why you need to see it in color. This shows possibly a reaction with acid to create this stain. So here's some evidence that he could be right, that chemicals were used to produce the hydrogen gas. We say, according to the indigenous tradition, that may be true at the very end, but the original source of was water. Next slide. Another piece of evidence. The granite beams in the Grand Gallery, especially on the south wall, are cracked. They have since repaired these cracks. This photograph was taken in 1992. You go there now, and the Egyptian government has sealed off these cracks, claiming they're doing repair work, but actually they're covering up their alternative evidence by doing that. So what is their motivation? We can talk about motivation at the end. Crack. Egyptologists say, oh, there must have been an earthquake which damaged the Great Pyramid. However, if you go down in the descending passageway, which leads into the bowels of the bedrock underneath the Great Pyramid, the descending passageway goes for 350 feet. The last 150 feet goes straight through limestone bedrock. There's not a scintilla of evidence of earthquake damage where it would be closer to the epicenter. No, there was an explosion in the Great Pyramid. And I can go into detail if we want to do that in questions. There was an explosion in the Great Pyramid. Part of the evidence is these granite beams, and there's space between them. If people know, there's so-called 5 relieving chambers above the King's chamber. They're not relieving chambers. They are for acoustic harmonic vibration, forms an acoustic comb filter with those granite blocks. These things were thrust up in the air and crashed down, and that's how they cracked. There's other evidence, major evidence that we can show you in the Great Pyramid, that there was an explosion in the Great Pyramid at one time, which ended its function as a power plant. And I documented that explosion could have happened between 10 and 12,000 years ago, the so-called fall of Atlantis. Next slide. Here's another, shows the tunnelways. We have aqueducts, passageways for water all over the Giza Pyramid. Can show you many of them in person when we're there. Water above ground, water underground, all coming to the pyramid for energy. Next slide. Here's one of the chambers we can take. It's called the Temple of the Four Guardians, south of the Middle Pyramid at Giza. We're going to go in there, and I'm going to show you one of the tunnels. Let's go in. Now, here we go in for we go down 30 feet, about an incline, and all these limestone blocks are blocking this passageway here. Well, what I did is I pulled some of these blocks out, took my camera and a flashlight, stuck it in the tunnel, and shot this next shot. And this is one of the tunnels under the Giza Plateau. Look at the walls again. Perfectly smooth almost. Almost right angle, not complete, but this is straight through limestone bedrock. Now it ends in a dead end here, and there's more limestone blocks put here. Who put them there? The Supreme Council of Antiquities. Where does this tunnel lead to the Sphinx? Now, again, the paradigm we're creating, though, is the majority of these tunnels were for water. That's not to say there's not halls of records. There's not to say that there's chambers on the Giza Plateau, which there will be artifacts. I don't think there'll be papyrus documents, but there'll be certain artifacts which can be used to document the history that we're talking about. But the majority of these tunnels, according to the indigenous tradition, were to bring water to the site. Next slide. Here we go. No evidence, says Zahir Was. No evidence, says Mark Lehner. Well, these are part of what, this is in the Cairo Museum. I could show you this in person. These are schist plates that were found by a British Egyptologist, Walter Emery, at Sakara in the 1930s. He found 15,000 of these stashed in an underground tomb. Nobody was buried there. No, it was no mummy there, but they say it was a tomb. They found all these instruments stashed. Instruments is key. This is schist plate. This is volcanic stone. This is not clay. This has not been molded. This is stone, volcanic igneous rock. It had these 3 flaps on them. They're missing. There's 1, 2. This one is missing. 3 flaps. And a center spoke, obviously to vibrate, to rotate. We'll tell you why very much at the end, and I hope we get to it. But this is part of a machine. There's no doubt about it. There's no evidence. Here's the evidence. They just don't know what they're looking at. These things were rotating, vibrating at an ultrasonic frequency, producing a sound vibration. What did the sound vibration do? It overcame the force of gravity. How was the Great Pyramid built? Levitation by sound. Next slide. Here again, these are stone plates found by Emery. Look at the one in the middle. This looks like it's supposed to fit to something, fit together. It's part of a machine or part of a device. Next slide. Right out on the Giza Plateau, you want to see an evidence of advanced machining? Here's a piece of pure concrete slab shown with this angle, and the whole story is documented in my book, how Christopher thought, I thought this was a piece of stone that Christopher had mentioned in his book. It wasn't. He said, my stone's even better. And the next slide will prove that. Because he took this picture in May of 1999. There's the man himself. And look at this. This is through granite, folks. What we call a multiple contoured angle. Tolerances which Christopher estimates to be 2/10,000ths of an inch. And all of manufacturing today around the world, and there may be some engineers in here who could back this up, what's called for with granite is nothing less than a 1/4 of an inch tolerance. It's never called for. There's no need for it. Now, why did these people go to these extremes to create these angles, tolerances and precision, 2/10,000ths of an inch, unless there was a reason? Yes, there was metaphysical, there was symbolic reasons. Yes, there had to be that too. But there had to be real practical reasons that they did this. And they couldn't possibly have done this with copper tools, copper chisels. This is granite. Next slide. Here we're at Abu Rash. Abu Rash is a very interesting site. There's a pyramid that was supposedly here. It's gone, destroyed, been quarried. Here's the evidence that the pyramid was there. Egyptologists claim it was a crude pyramid built out of mud brick. No, here's the limestone core. Next slide. I guess we have to move quickly now. I'm getting a flash. Here I am, Hakim taking this picture. We found the corner socket stones of the pyramid, showing here's the original stones. This is built just like the Giza pyramid, it's not any different. Next slide. Here's also the socket stones. Here, that's all it's left. It looks like rubble. It looks like it's been destroyed or quarried. We think destroyed, and that's a whole other story we can talk about maybe in question. Next slide. Here's the interior. Now, what this pyramid was fused. This is a hill made of pure limestone, maybe 100 feet high. What they did is cored out the whole hill, built the pyramid into the mountain, into the hill, fusing. This is part of the core infrastructure, still left of the pyramid, fused to the natural limestone. Now, if you don't think this is sophisticated engineering, come, let's talk about it. Next slide. Here we are looking up, showing the infrastructure still left of the pyramid, fused to the natural limestone, which they cored out. Does this include the time that I was taken away from me? Because we didn't start on time. Okay, let's move quickly through the slides. Here's a boy for scale, a village boy standing in the infocore structure of the pyramid, cored out. Next slide. To show that this was not an inferior pyramid, here's a granite block showing that they used granite here at Abu Rash, just like they did at Giza. Next slide. There's the sight line from Abu Rash shows the Giza pyramids. All the pyramids of Bu Wizard go all in a complete line. All the way you can see faint pyramids in the background. 25 miles you can see the pyramids on a clear day when there's no smog from Cairo, which is hard to do these days. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to make it then because I have slides to show you the Western Desert. So, would you folks like to have a shorter dinner break? And we certainly will give Frank Joseph his proper time. Does majority rule? Because I can move through it quickly, and I certainly think that Frank, deserves his time. Okay, here we are out in the Western Desert, where we went in 1998. Now here's evidence of structures formed by water. Nothing else. Now, geologists will say that there was an ancient ocean which came here millions of years ago which created this. But that's not true, because there's evidence that there was fresh water here. And we can prove that there was evidence of fresh water here, that this was an ancient riverbed. Next slide. More. This, again, any geologists in the audience, again, this is supposed to be desert, but look at this. Looks like the evidence of ancient waterways carving out this landscape. And this is out in the western desert between the oasis of Farafra and Baharia, which was taken, showing evidence of the ancient waterway. Next slide. Again, evidence of ancient lake beds, water beds, riverbeds out in the western desert where the ancient civilization came from. Next slide. Again, this is a vista where we're looking hundreds of miles long to show how extensive this Nil, which is a German term, which means primordial the ancient river was hundreds of miles across, as well as thousands of miles long. It was a huge river. We postulate that all of ancient northern Africa, over 14,000 years ago, was a series of large, lush, green islands. And that's where the civilization came from. Next slide. Now, very important. This is known as the Hebes Temple at the site of Dakhla Oasis, Akarga Oasis, excuse me. This is a Greek Ptolemaic temple. It's not old. It's been constructed. It's since been moved. Why? Supreme Council of Antiquity said, well, there was water damage coming in, water erosion, which was damaging this temple, so they dismantled it, lock, stock, and barrel, and moved it somewhere else. Water damage. Why would there be water damage? There's an underground river under here. There's also another temple under here, which we found evidence of, a much older temple. And there's also limestone and granite blocks laying around, which are not part of this temple, which are part of the ancient temple. Next slide. Okay, Ptah. I don't know if we're going to have time. Ptah. Who was Ptah? Ptah is one of these ancient netters, creator gods, always wearing a blue cap or depicted with blue skin. His indigenous translation is he who comes from the blue. The blue is symbolized connecting with the star system Sirius. The ancient Cometians, both dynastic and prehistoric, were fascinated, obsessed with the star system Sirius. Read The Sirius Mystery by Robert Temple, Murray Hope's book. And there is a reason that they believed that the star system Sirius was a homeland for them. Now, he's often said by Egyptologists to be a mummy in swaddling. This is not mummy. These are feathers. He's shown being a feather, like a bird. What is the bird again? The bird can transcend the earth. Hakim told me in October of 1999, the full translation of Ptah is, he who came from the blue through the waters from the stars. Now, are they saying that the homeland is Sirius? Possibly. Is Ptah also where the word Zeus comes from, or Deus, to the Greeks, where the word pater comes to Latin, pater, father, Ptah, father god, father race? Possibly. We talk about that in a chapter of my book. Next. And there's Sekhmet, his consort, still has the blue pigment on her face. This is at Kamumbo. There's Ptah himself. And there's Sekhmet, his consort. She's also clearly identified with Sirius, as is the Sphinx, Tefnut, Sirius. And she still has the blue pigment on her face. Next star. Now, this is important. We're almost done with slides. This is the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. This obelisk is one pure piece of granite. It's over 110 feet long, estimated to weigh 1,180 tons. Now, Mark Lehner just did a special on Nova where he was there with his little stone pounder in the ditch, saying, well, this is how they freed the stone, where every little worker had his little square and was pounding with the stone. And then the Egyptologists say, well, when they did this, they realized it was too big, they couldn't lift it, and there's a crack in it. Well, the crack is underneath. This stone is completely dressed. It was ready to be shipped. When they were ready, they realized there was a crack in the natural granite itself, and that's why they did not remove it. But they had every intention of moving the stone and putting it in place, almost 1,200 tons. There's no crane in the world that can lift it today. The record was just done within the last year or two in Great Britain, where they supposedly lifted a 1,000-ton weight. That's the modern record. This is almost 1,200 tons. And they lifted it like it was nothing. Next slide. And here I am, quickly, the last two slides. This is also alabaster, but finely polished. Here we are in the Cairo Museum. I can show you this. This is supposedly a sarcophagus, sarcophagus, Greek word which means body eater, where a coffin was put, where the body would be entombed. Nonsense, this is not a sarcophagus. This is a device for acoustic harmonic resonance, and it clearly shows sophisticated advanced machining, highly polished with sophisticated angles in pure granite, in pure alabaster, excuse me. Next slide. I think we're done. We are. So if there's any time for questions, doesn't look like there is.
Why, yeah, please. We need a lot more for Stephen. Would you please see, this isn't working at all. Would you please see, would you take questions for Stephen in the hall?
I'll take questions at the booth. I'm going
the
to be
booth?
signing, books. We certainly don't want to take Frank's time. But just quickly to understand that there was hot and cold running water. The water came into the pyramid by the use of the shape of the